Everyone, Michael Sykes, NGF Attorneys, there it is up there. My advice to my younger self would be to be personal, to be prompt, and to be professional. And that's what I've tried to bring forward in my own business. When the phone gets answered, it gets answered by me. It's personal. When you want to sign documents, you see me. You don't see a secretary, you see me. That's it. One thing that I learned visiting Disney World was to under-promise and over-deliver. When you're going to go on a ride at Disney World and there's this long queue, they've got boards set up along the way saying how many minutes it is until you get to the front of the queue. And when you're at 20 minutes, it's actually only 10 minutes. So you're constantly being amazed by the delivery that they're giving. And the last thing I'd say is to focus on the 20% who give you the bulk of your work. So that's what I have to say about to my younger self. So today, wills and succession in South Africa, why the dead? The lawyer's busy. A man will tell you how he wished to be remembered. His estate file tells you what really happened. Benjamin Franklin famously said there are two certainties in life, death and taxes. I'd like to add another one to that. It's not necessarily a certainty, but it happens quite often, is that after death, somebody will discover a long-lost relative, an unsigned will, a secret marriage, or a family feud. That happens pretty often. So there you can see the people getting a bit confused and a bit worried. So why wills matter? A will allows you to choose who inherits your assets. You may recall the previous talk I gave was about intestate succession, and there you don't really have a choice in who inherits your assets. The law determines that for you. You can get to appoint guardians for your minor children. You can set up trusts in that will. It's a lot cheaper to set up the trust then than in a inter vivos trust, which is a trust set up while you're still alive. It can reduce uncertainty and family conflicts, and believe me, once the will is out, everybody who used to be all buddy-buddy and chummy, they're not so chummy any longer. It can speed up the administration of the assets, and it can, without a valid will, the law decides who inherits, as I said. So what happens when you die without a will? The Intestate Succession Act comes into play, and just briefly, the spouse and children inherit, then it goes to your parents, then to any of your siblings, and then more distant relatives. Finally, none of those can be found. After 30 years, it goes to the state. So it's a bit of a waste, isn't it, really, to go to the state. Many people believe their assets will automatically go where they intended. Where's it written down? The Master of the High Court is interested in what the law says and not what Uncle Charlie said at the last Christmas dinner. The requirements for a valid will in South African law is the will must be in writing. It must be signed by the testator or testatrix and two witnesses, all present at the same time, all watching each other sign, and it must be signed on every single page. The testator must be over 16 years of age. The testator must understand what they're doing. They've got to have sufficient knowledge that they know what they're doing, and each page should be signed. Two competent witnesses must sign. That means anybody over the age of 14 who is competent to give evidence in a court of law. And they also need to be of sound mind and capable of understanding the events.
Can an heir sign?
No, an heir can't sign. It's just what I was coming to. It may not be a beneficiary or the spouse of the beneficiary, otherwise that disqualifies them from receiving any inheritance. And that would be a real tragedy. The spouse signs happily, and then she gets nothing. Nothing at all. Not so great. what happens when someone cannot sign a will themselves? They must still be of sound mind and know what they're doing, but maybe because of a medical condition, age, they're illiterate, they cannot actually sign the will. So what happens then? You can sign by making a mark. It says you can make a mark, sign a cross. You can put a thumbprint or a fingerprint on the will, or, and this one surprises people, somebody else can sign on your behalf. And they must sign using their own name, their own signature. But in all three of those circumstances, making a mark, a fingerprint, or someone else signing, a commission of oaths has to sign that will as well. And there's a particular certificate that they have to put at the bottom of the first page and sign. And then it does say that the commission of oaths must just sign all the other pages. I prefer to actually put this certificate at the bottom of every single page so that there is no room for error. Right. Yeah, that's the certificate. The most common estate disputes. Multiple wills. People sign a number of wills. And that is why we often insert the date and even the time of signature on a will. Because when you have conflicting wills, which one prevails? And believe me, people are going to fight about which one prevails. Undue influence. Now, when I was still an article clerk, the firm I was working for had the will of a very old lady who was in a nursing home at Margate on the south coast. And in her will, she had left everything to one of the nurses. We were a bit concerned about undue influence. So I was tasked with driving down to Margate, getting the petrol money, and as an article clerk, that was lovely getting petrol money. And I had to interview this old lady who was bedridden. She was on her way out. But in speaking to her, she clearly knew who she was, what she was doing, and that she did really want her estate to go to this nurse. But it happens often that caregivers will influence a testate or a testatrix into making them the heir. Lack of capacity, as we said, if you don't have sound mind or you're too young to make a will. Missing originals, it's no good having a copy of a will. Helps to an extent, but the master requires an original. And he has this wonderful test to see if the will is an original. He licks his thumb, he wipes it across the signature. If the signature smudges, it's an original. But what we also often recommend to people is don't sign in black ink. The only documents that have to be signed in black ink are conveyancing documents, documents that end up in the deeds registry. One of my former partners always used to sign with a green pen if he was being a witness to a will. And it just helps you to identify what the original is, because some of the copies today are amazingly good copies, and you really battle to see whether it is an original or a copy. Disputes about marriages and children, handwritten amendments. One of the worst things, people think, oh, I'll just write on this will, and they write on it, it's not properly witnessed. I never suggest to people, even do a codicil. I hate codicils. You know, codicil is something that is it's part of a will. It's made after your original will, and you've suddenly changed your mind about clause 1, and you say, no, instead of clause 1 going to Andrew, it's going to go to Tanya. And that's not a great thing in my opinion. I would rather redraw the will. If they're going to have to sign it before witnesses, redraw the will, and get them to re-sign a new will. And death often reveals family secrets that were successfully hidden for decades. And within my extended family, we have an example of this. The grandparents of the person were married, they got divorced. Sorry, they had 6 children. They got divorced, and he lived with another lady, and this other lady had a son. And then later on, the grandfather came back to live with his first spouse and remarried her. And it was only much later that the family discovered that this other son belonged to their grandfather. And they only found that out when they were in their much older years, like in their 40s or 50s. They found out that here was this guy who was now a professor at a university, was actually a half-brother. So around the world, testators have attempted to leave money to pets. Now, in South Africa, you can do this, but you can't leave it to the pet per se, because a pet is not defined as a person. It falls out of the definition of a person. So if you're going to leave money to the pet, you can leave it to a person with the instructions that they are to look after the pet until its death. You can create a trust for that pet, and the trustees have to look after that pet until its death. But you can see the problem here, can't you? Yes, the pet dies quite soon. But a lot of people do leave their assets to the SPCA or to World Wildlife Fund, many different institutions that it can be left to. But you have to be careful, and the law has changed. At one stage there were certain testamentary trusts that were put into operation in the 30s, 40s and 50s that provided scholarships for kids to go to university. But those were only drawn from members of the white race. And people took those trusts to the High Court, and those were amended to say that you couldn't specify the race of the person that was to get money to go to university. What else have we got? Yes, other things that testators do, they will disinherit children for marrying unsuitable spouses, or there'll be a clause saying, if you marry Joe Bloggs, you're not going to get anything. Sometimes they try to control whether their wife remarries or not. They may require heirs to visit the graveyard. All of those things are deemed either, what are the words? They are improper. I have the words just now. Anyway, you may not do those because they are against the law, because they're illegal, impossible, or contrary to public policy. The case of the missing will. One of the recurring themes in succession law is the mysteriously disappearing will. The version favouring only one family member survives. The other will disappears. Suddenly everyone becomes an expert on what the deceased really intended. The deceased didn't write it down, make it a will, it doesn't matter what they think he should have done. Lawyers call this litigation, families call it war. If you want a good legal read that won't put you to sleep too quickly, I refer you to Professor Ellison Kahn's book, The Bloody Hand, Wills and Crime. The title of the book comes from an old Roman Dutch saying, "De bloedige hand erft niet," which means the bloody hand does not inherit. So if you murder someone and you are a beneficiary of the will, you ain't going to get anything. So that's why that comes about. And his book reminds us that wills often expose greed, family intrigues, deceptions, sometimes murder. While most estates are less dramatic, the underlying human nature remains unchanged. Some practical steps in estate planning. Every South African adult should have a current will. Review that will after marriage or divorce. Review it if there's been a death in the family. If there's been a birth in the family, review it, update it. Tell someone where it is kept. It's no good having a will that is so carefully hidden and kept in an unknown cupboard. It's about as useful as a will that is not signed at all. Increasingly today, we are seeing digital assets as having a major impact on wills. You need to consider these when drawing your will. Email accounts, because sometimes people have got important business that's happening on Facebook and in their email list. How do you get into it? Leave those sort of contact details somewhere. Digital assets like Bitcoin. I'm currently working on an estate where we think we know that the deceased had a substantial Bitcoin investment, but we can't find it. We did find it, we haven't got the password or the crypto key to it. You can't access it. So you really need to be so aware of all of these things: email accounts, social media profiles, cloud storage, online accounts, you name it, you have to be aware of that. The real cost of dying without a will is delays, family conflict, as you can see, they're all quite angry here, legal expenses, and emotional stress. A will is one of the few documents that speaks for you after you have gone. The question is whether it speaks clearly or creates confusion. One of the best wills I saw was drawn by the father of a friend of ours. He wrote it on a sheet of Croxley notepaper. I, Joe Bloggs, ID number, living here, leave everything to my spouse name. I nominate my daughter, Joan, as the executor of my estate, and she doesn't have to put up security for the administration of the estate. Signed, witnessed, one little page like that, that will and that estate sailed through. We do tend to make them a bit more complicated, because a lot of people have quite complicated estates. We do look at setting up trusts. What happens if someone dies? Does it go to the children? How it's going to go? All of that sort of thing. Right. And I go on to my last little bit here. Some peculiar things. So, farms. Often people will leave a farm to their 3 children. That doesn't really help, because the Subdivision of Agricultural Land Act says that only one person can inherit. Now what happens? You've got 3 people. Do you have to sell the farm so that they can all get the money? Maybe one of the kids really wants to farm. One wants the money, one wants the memory that they had of growing up on the farm. So what we often recommend to people is leave the farm to the child who really wants to farm. And then go to somebody like Andrew Stearnslow to take out the right sort of policy that will pay out the other children close to the value of the farm. It cuts out a lot of family squabbles. I think of my own brother-in-law. He inherited a farm. He had to pay out his sisters. It took him about 20 years to pay them out. And then you really are working for somebody else and not benefiting yourself from all of your hard work on the farm. We also have those secret second marriages that I described earlier. The hidden safe. The deceased always said, everything is in the safe. And when you get to open the safe, there are 3 old rugby programs, 3 watches that don't work, and no will. That is us. Today's discussion inspires you to review your will or to draw a will. I trust that I've probably saved you a great deal of time, money, and argument. Thank you very much.